11 o'clock now. Do we want to get started or give everyone just a few more minutes to join?
I think we have close to 100 people, so we're upward greater than 80. So I would say let's start.
Let me stop sharing the screen then. You guys can go ahead, Steph.
So good morning. My name is Stephanie Silverth, and I'm the Education and Outreach Director in the Office of Accountability, and I will be serving as your monitor for today's discussion. Please note everybody has been muted for the session. Do not unmute yourself. Use the Q&A, not the chat, to send your questions. When posting your questions, make sure it's to all panelists. For questions that are specific to a research protocol, we ask that you follow up with UMB's Human Research Protection Office, Dr. Doherty, or Dr. Rosenthal directly. Their contact information will be provided at the end of the session. Our panelists today are Dr. Susan Buskirk, who is an Associate Vice President and serves as the institutional official for UMB. Joining her are Dr. Robert Rosenthal, who serves as the Chairman of UMB's Institutional Review Board, and Dr. Dooley Doherty, the Director of UMB's Human Research Protections Program. Good morning, doctors, and thank you for taking the time for our Q&A session this morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Dr. Buskirk, would you like to start off with an overview?
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. And first, I want to say thank you to well over 100 individuals who have joined us this morning. We appreciate you taking the time out. We know times are very busy and your time is limited, so we hope to provide guidance and clarification and allow opportunity for questions regarding the task force guidance for human or clinical research that was disseminated to the community back in March. But first, I'm going to give you an update on some other initiatives that are taking place to help facilitate human subjects research. So again, Drs. Doherty and Rosenthal are going to be talking about the guidance more in depth. But several weeks ago, in addition to the guidance, and as we began to see research proposals and ideas come forward, I sent out a notice to the research community to please proactively notify us and let us know the anticipated projects that you all were planning or your investigators were planning. And on the heels of that, we established a coordinating committee for human subjects research. I assembled key stakeholders, including the IRB, the HRPO, representatives from IHV, CBD, the hospital, the biocontainment unit, Department of Medicine chair, the Department of Surgery chair, with the purpose of increasing communication across those disciplines and across departments and entities on the campus who are conducting research, and start talking about developing a coordinated research response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The coordinating committee has met weekly, and our first meeting was very successful with everybody agreeing that a coordinated, comprehensive research response is appropriate at this time. I will say we're still operating under the severe restrictions for research, and we have no idea at this moment in time when those will be lifted or eased. So I would anticipate continuing to function the way we're functioning under severe restrictions, at least for several more weeks. With that said, COVID-19 research is our priority in terms of the world of research. But that comes secondary to clinical care and safety of our patients, our hospital personnel, our doctors, nurses, ancillary personnel, and our research personnel. So out of the coordinating committee, Drs. Rosenthal, along with Dr. Stephen Davis, the director or Department of Medicine chair, established a research advisory task force with the objective of reviewing and prioritizing these research proposals prior to submission to the IRB for review and approval. And the purpose of that is to really review this research and determine priorities and necessity and feasibility. And Dr. Rosenthal will speak more about that. Second task force that emerged from the coordinating committee was a COVID-19 human research operations committee. Julie Darty, Dr. Darty has led this with representatives from UMB as well as UMMC with the goal of beginning a conversation and increase the communication necessary for facilitating COVID-19 research. So I don't have to tell you all the challenges and the complexity for doing research in this environment. And certainly this is a time that it's going to take all of us working together across boundaries, across disciplines, across organizations to efficiently and effectively conduct the clinical research that's going to give us the answers to help fight this virus. With that, I think I will turn it over to Dr. Rosenthal to speak about the Research Advisory Task Force. And Dr. Rosenthal?
And thank you. So the Research Advisory Task Force was formed to recognize the fact that we have a tremendous number of superior, excellent research protocols that are being submitted to our IRB and other IRBs, recognizing also the fact that our patients are our clinical priority and that there is a limited number of studies which can actually be done at the same time without compromising patient care or compromising the rights and welfare of research subjects. So the task force is made up of a multidisciplinary group in an attempt to review the protocols and determine which should proceed and which should have the highest priority. We've sort of based this on the equivalent of an NIH study group, where the protocols are circulated to a bunch of different investigators, administrators, et cetera. And after a review and presentation of them to the whole committee, a priority score is assigned to each of the studies to determine whether or not, or determine what level of enthusiasm the group has. And a smaller group, that we're calling it the Research Advisory Council, will actually meet to try and determine which protocols should proceed. Now, we separate the protocols out into basically two different levels. The first level is greater than minimal risk studies that have the potential for direct benefit to the research subject. And these are clinical trials and involving some of the drugs you've heard about, hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, and others, which can be at University of Maryland Medical Center. Another level of review will also be studies that have to do with minimal risk studies, studies that can be done from home in many situations where people can survey charts, can do the types of procedures that are normally done without interactions with the patients. And in these particular studies, there's going to be a much greater tendency to allow these to proceed, and there's going to be much less interference from the group. The final thing, which is being done right now, which is being formulated right as we talk, is the approach to studies that require only sampling from the patients, be they blood samples, nasal swabs, oral swabs, things like that. And an overall committee is being formed right now under the leadership of Dr. Peter Rock, Chairman of Anesthesiology, to coordinate all these studies and to help disperse the samples in an equitable way so that all the investigators, or most of the investigators, can get access to the samples they need without requiring 15 trips into the room of the patient on any one day. And that sort of just gives an overview, what we're trying to do at the present time.
Julie, can you provide an overview of the Clinical Research Task Force?
Certainly. So we got key stakeholders together to talk about and to receive feedback, because we knew it was going to be extremely important to get feedback from nurses and other allied health professionals about how research activities should interact and overlay with clinical research activities. And we thought it was extremely important for us and the Human Research Protection Program to hear back from those individuals, to get candid information. With the HRPP stressing that research activities in no way should increase risk to either clinical staff, overly burden clinical staff, or increase any risk to potential research subjects. We had a very beneficial and candid meeting, and that has helped to inform review of protocols and review of other activities moving forward. We will continue to have this group meet so we can continue to receive, real-time feedback to help us and to help the IRB make informed decisions, and for the advisory group to make informed decisions about prioritization of COVID protocols moving forward.
Thanks.
So for our first question, what research does the March UMB committee report and recommendations apply to? Dr. Hardy, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. So on March 18th, there is a document that was distributed to the research community, which actually involved a guidance distributed for both basic animal and human subjects research. So the guidance that I'm going to be referring to, only the clinical research guidance. And the committee members were individuals from across the campus, School of Medicine, Cancer Center, School of Nursing, IHV, Human Research Protection Program, and giving very careful and thoughtful consideration to the types of protocols that should move forward under pandemic conditions, with the primary goal of protecting subjects and protecting research personnel and clinical staff. The decision to enroll or continue on research should be based initially on the level of risk as determined by the IRB. And let me just digress here 1 second. These guidelines are posted on the coronavirus UMB website, dated March 18th, 2020. Minimal risk research move forward. Participants may not be present at UMB or UMMC for follow-up except for urgent conditions. Participants can continue to be enrolled if all activities can be completed through telemedicine or other remote mechanisms. We have issued guidance on obtaining informed consent on during pandemic conditions and using remote mechanisms, using electronic consent, using any type of activity which does not involve face-to-face interactions with research subjects or with family members. Participants can also be enrolled in minimal risk studies if activities are part of routine care, and that enrollment or follow-up can be performed by clinical staff who have been designated essential for pandemic conditions. So that's minimal risk research. Any type of activity that can be done remotely, chart reviews, interviews, all allowed to take place currently right now. In terms of greater than minimal risk research, only that which has the potential for direct therapeutic benefit should currently be conducted. Subjects that are already enrolled may continue in a trial that has direct therapeutic benefit if removal from the trial would negatively impact the safety or welfare of the research subject. Study teams should work very closely with their investigators to determine which subjects should be continuing in studies. And that is a decision that may change over the course of the pandemic. Someone who was deemed to be someone who should be in a study early on, within the past month, that may change moving forward. So it's something that needs to be considered as study teams and investigators have continued remote interactions or continued interactions with subjects. In terms of continuing new enrollment in greater than minimal risk studies, those studies that allow new enrollment are only those where there's direct critical therapeutic benefit. And if an investigator believes that that is the case, we need to work with their chairperson or their dean to affirm the appropriateness of each trial moving forward. Enrollment in non-critical therapeutic research is not allowed at this time. As Dr. Buzzkirk and Dr. Rosenthal had previously stated, therapeutic trials for coronavirus are receiving priority review in the IRB. In addition, minimal risk research is receiving priority review also. We've issued guidance on, or additional guidance about emergency use of test articles and expanded access. And then the guidance also includes the type of research, community research that might take place in nursing homes or senior centers or other types of community facilities. That research is being paused right now, except if subject safety would be endangered by not performing a research intervention or monitoring of a treatment, or where the research intervention can be performed by a permanent staff member who's also a research team member. Over the past several weeks, we have asked or been answering multiple questions from the research community, providing interpretation and clarification on this guidance. And we will continue to do so as anyone deems it necessary. For international research, the above guidelines do apply, and directives from local ethics committees in country or ministries of health would also apply to this guidance. And we are here to answer any questions that may apply to international research.
Dr. Rosenthal, is there anything you'd like to add to the overview of what the guidance provides? He's muted.
Sorry. This guidance applies not only to protocols that are approved or reviewed by the University of Maryland IRB, but by any IRB. So if something is approved by WERB, for example, or Advera, just because it's approved doesn't necessarily mean that it can proceed. We have to refer to the guidelines that were promulgated on March 18th in order to review that. And similarly, if a person submits a new protocol to one of these central IRBs and it's approved, it needs to be approval from the our institution before that protocol can proceed, whether or not ethical review has been conducted by another institution or by another central IRB.
Okay, so our next question is a multi-part question. So what is the process for submitting for preliminary review of human subjects research related to COVID-19? Can you talk about that approval process? Is it part of the IRB submission process? And does it need to be obtained prior to or during a grant submission?
I guess I can take that one. There is a form that needs to be filled out that gets submitted to the Research Advisory Task Force, which gives basic details of what's going on with the study. This can be done simultaneous with submission to Cicero. As a matter of fact, it makes it a little bit easier to Cicero because it allows the committee to review the full facts of the study. But if it's not submitted to Cicero, we ask that appropriate documentation be attached um, to that submission. This form will then be reviewed by the task force, by the review task force, and a priority score attached. Dr. Doherty, I think you can probably tell better how to access that form, where the appropriate way is to get that form and to submit it.
Absolutely. So the submission form is posted on the HRPO website and was also sent out by Dr. Buskirk last week. It asks a very simple list of questions and requests as much information as the investigator would have at the moment. Again, some of these are just ideas and concepts and innovations that investigators and teams are exploring at this time. And whether you have a full protocol or you have a concept sheet, either or is appropriate. You can attach it along with this document, and you can send it to my attention, and I then triage it appropriately to the committee members. If you have any questions about that process, explicitly, feel free to contact me. I can tell you that we have received 10 or 12 already since it has gone out. So people are, aware of the process and are using it appropriately at this time.
The next part of that question was, is this part of the IRB submission process? So you said it can or cannot be done concurrently with Cicero. You want to expand on that?
It is not actually part of the IRB submission process. The IRB submission process is for ethical review. This is an institution-wide attempt to determine priorities of studies. So theoretically, a study could be submitted through the process through which Dr. Doherty and I have just described, and the decision might be to put it on hold for a little while, and that not be submitted to Cicero or to the IRB. So the ideal way this would work would be initial review by the committee. If it's deemed this should go forward, then the Cicero application is completed review.
The last part is, does this need to be obtained prior to or during grant submission?
I can take that. So we have had some investigators who are submitting. There's been a lot of RFAs and RFPs from different entities, and the submission to the committee could be done in parallel with the grant submission. This would give an awareness to the committee of what could be potentially be funded, and it would also give the institution an awareness of what type of research could be coming down the pike if indeed it does get funded. So those processes could be done in parallel.
I think it's important to point out that if a protocol is initially deemed not appropriate to go forward, that's not like, the death of the protocol. Things have changed. So, I mean, I think we can all think back a month ago and realize that the world has changed tremendously in the past month, and we would have no idea that we'd be sitting here now doing what we're doing and the way we're doing it. This process, this infection, this pandemic is not going to go away in the next 2 to 3 weeks. It'd be nice if it would. And so something that may not be appropriate now or may not be high priority now, 6 months from now may be the absolute thing that we need in order to investigate this forward. So we prioritize something, we prioritize it, with the perspective of mid-April. How that's going to look in mid-May or June or something like that, we can't say. So wouldn't not work on something or not submit something just because there are other protocols which are active now. Things may change tremendously over time.
Can you provide a little more information and explain the study section?
The study section is made up of, I think there were close to 20 people at the meeting, and with representation from all the major stakeholders, including the IHV, CVD, clinical representation from the people from the biocontainment unit in the hospital, Department of Medicine, Department of Surgery, Shock Trauma, the HRPO, the IRB, and multiple others, emergency medicine and multiple others. The whole point of this is to try and get the perspective of everyone involved. I mean, a good example was we have a bunch of researchers with very extensive research experience, and it wasn't until we talked to the person, Dr. Tabatabai, who is head of the biocontainment unit, that I think all of us got a real feel for what the intricacies would be of doing research in the time of the COVID pandemic, about what it's like to enter the room with a patient, how much time you can spend there, what problems we would be putting on nursing staff trying to get samples, extra samples from what they had there. So the whole point of this group was to try and get perspective, a broad perspective, try and get an idea of what was important in terms of research now, and then to begin to prioritize protocols.
We had been up on the share screening and they were asking if it was available on the COVID site.
Stephanie, can you repeat that question and speak up a little louder, please?
Sorry. The file that was shared, the guidance, they asked if it was posted on the COVID site for UMB.
Yes, the UMB COVID-19 site, Tony scrolled down there. It's by date, March 18th. And what was showing on the screen during the discussion was part of that, but I would encourage you to read the document in its entirety and remember that we are currently operating under severe restrictions. There were moderate restrictions distributed, and shortly thereafter, within a matter of 48 to 72 hours, we were operating under the severe restrictions, and we will continue to do that until further notice.
So another question is, you said the committees and the task force are meeting weekly. When will or where will additional information be available?
That we were only meeting weekly, that would give us a little more time. Actually, some of these committees and task force are meeting almost daily or more frequently than this. We basically just went through the first go round of a review yesterday, and with priority scores assigned. There's going to be a meeting, I believe it's this afternoon, of what we're calling the council, which is a group of 5 to 7 people, the major stakeholders in this, to then really prioritize the protocols and make decisions about make recommendations about which protocol should go forward. And then this will be presented, I believe it's on Friday, to the task force as a whole for final sign off on that. So I would imagine that more information will be available in the next 3 to 4 days.
And for the coordinating committee, this is a higher level coordinating committee, and again, the primary purpose is for communication and coordination. And I will just reiterate what Dr. Rosenthal said. While we are on a WebEx once a week over the past several weeks, I think there have been at least 3 different communications distributed to the research community already that I've sent out in terms of providing information and requesting information in order to facilitate these activities. In addition to that, I individually have been meeting with our president, Dr. Bruce Gerald, senior leadership in the School of Medicine, as well as hospital senior leadership in the hospital. And the purpose of the coordinating committee, again, was to get this up and running in terms of anticipating what was going to be needed to facilitate and support clinical research, and it's working and it's happening. And so now the stakeholders and the individuals, such as all of you listening and watching today, using the guidance, using the work of the advisory task force as well as the operations task force will be implementing and will be facilitating this. Now, in terms of the operations task force, I will say that I would say it's a couple of steps behind, in that ramping up, just as you all ramped down and the institution ramped down research across the board, the COVID-19 specific research has been ramping up, and we're still in that ramping up phase. And so we're on the front end of receiving ideas and proposals, getting them through the process of review, as Dr. Rosenthal described, getting them through the IRB review process, and then the next step is how is it going to be implemented? And just yesterday, we had a meeting with stakeholders, and Dr. Stephen Davis, the Department of Medicine chair, is working with transitioning and using nursing resources as well as ICTR and possibly GCRC resources to continue working on the operations piece of conducting clinical research. And they will, as soon as we have more information and definitive information to communicate to you all, it will be coming out. We've acted very quickly and we've communicated very quickly about everything that we're doing, including this WebEx. And so we will continue to do that to the best of our ability based on new information and decisions that come. We will present them to you as soon as possible.
So the next question we have is, what is the expected time frame for the review process from the time of submission going forward?
As I don't think I'm muted. We currently are meeting as a group for review twice a week. We are the council is meeting more frequently than that as needed, and basically as soon as something is submitted, it will get taken to the meeting. If I'm not mistaken, there was a protocol submitted yesterday morning before the meeting, and it got reviewed at that time. So there's going to be very little lag from the time of submission of the form until the review. It doesn't necessarily mean that the review is going to be complete. One or two of the protocols were actually tabled because of insufficient information in order to really review them, but it's going to be a fairly quick process. The other thing that I wanted to point out is I know that it's a separate step, but once this comes out of this process, if IRB is needed, especially if it's critical, I've asked about 7 or 8 members, senior members of the IRB, to form sort of an emergency IRB unit, such that if there's a protocol which meets high priority, it needs to get through the ethical process quickly. We can meet as early as the next day, do this on an ad hoc basis. So a protocol need not necessarily wait for the next IRB meeting, or even worse situation for a meeting 2 times later because the agenda is full. So we're committed to doing ethical review very quickly on these protocols that receive high priority.
So the next question is, can a new non-COVID related, minimal risk, totally remote recruitment study still be submitted for IRB at this time?
Yes.
Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay.
We are continuing with the IRB has been fully operational from a remote perspective since March 11th. Operations have continued seamlessly during this time. All IRB meetings are being conducted remotely, and IRB business is being maintained. All protocols can be submitted as usual, with COVID-19 protocols being given priority review.
Another question is, Is it possible to submit IRB modifications for current projects that have the capability of modifying in-person components, such as study visits, to virtual and remote? And can a COVID-related component be added to these protocols?
So the first part of that question, can a modification be made to make remote aspects of the study? The answer to that is yes, although it is not required. We had initially stated that if changes were being made, the IRB stated if changes were being made to a protocol to eliminate immediate apparent hazards to subjects, which would result in implementation of remote activities, interviews, focus groups, consenting, that those modifications did not need to be submitted to the IRB because they were taken to minimize risk to subjects and to research personnel. Can you repeat the second part of the question?
Can a COVID-related component be added to these protocols?
The answer is yes. A COVID-related component can be added. And again, depending on what that COVID-related component is, it may require review by the study section. So if there's a component being added that would say request blood sampling, or some type of intervention that would be wants to be undertaken for COVID patients. It could be investigational drug that's going to be given to them, and then the study section would need to review that. But if it's a modification where you're just adding interviews and surveys or something like that, that could go through the expedited review process.
This is a similar question. For an ongoing approved minimal risk study that would like to change their procedures to be all online, would the necessary IRB modifications be prioritized for review?
Those modifications would be expedited, and so it would not take a long time. So I wouldn't say they'd be prioritized. But the other thing is, I mean, if anything that needs to be done in order to maintain the safety of the research subjects or the research staff does take high priority, and people can essentially switch over to that while they're doing the modification. So we would not object to that, and we wouldn't ding them for it either. Am I right, Julie, or am I overstepping my boundaries there?
No, you're 100% correct. It's a change taken to the protocol to eliminate an immediate apparent hazard. And we need, the research community needs to keep in contact with these research subjects to provide them reassurance that, the investigators are here to answer questions, and that certain components of the research are ongoing. So I think it's extremely important to make the changes that you deem necessary to provide ongoing oversight and to protect the research subjects.
One thing that I just want to stress, if there's ever any question about that, both Dr. Doherty and I are available pretty much all the time. As a matter of fact, the Human Research Protection Organization was nice enough to put my cell phone number on the answering machine of the HRPO. So if anybody ever needs to get in touch with me, just call me or email me or text me or something like that, and we can sort of work through these things very rapidly.
The next question, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. They have a research protocol for a multi-study center study, and to be able to share the data, they are sending the protocol to the task force for review. Is there any other steps that they have to go through, or is it just the process that you've discussed so far?
So without knowing the specifics of the study, the only other step that I think could be involved would be whether or not a data use agreement would be necessary, depending on who's sharing the data with who. The study section, IRB review and approval. But if there's a data use agreement that's necessary, that certainly can go in parallel with the other activities that are going on. But who's ever asking this question, please feel free to give me a call, and we can iron out the specifics and help facilitate.
The next question is, can you explain compassionate use for COVID-19 patients?
Compassionate use, there's not much of it available right now. There was a protocol for remdesivir, an antiviral agent, to use compassionate use for people that were well advanced into the COVID-19 process. Part of the difficulty with that study was there was such a cry for the drug that Gilead, that was the pharmaceutical company that was producing it, actually was running out of stock and had to stop the compassionate use program. At present, the only compassionate use that I'm aware of, the protocol that we have, is the remdesivir protocol that allows only for children and pregnant women that have advanced COVID-19. Compassionate use suggests that you're using a drug which may or may not be approved, and you're not using it for the approved mechanism, and that FDA grants the ability to use this drug for this particular type of process. Julie, are you aware of any other compassionate use protocols that are active right now?
No, none that are active right now. There's one or two where that are kind of in the concept stage, but they don't involve remdesivir, but they do involve other drugs.
Dr. Rosenthal, do you want to make a comment, or could you make a comment about the recent guidelines that the IDSA also put forth, the recommendations?
I think those happened yesterday when I was half asleep after being up all night. So I'm going to punt that to Dr. Doherty, who I think is more familiar with them than I am at this point.
So there were guidelines that were issued by the Infectious Disease Society of America that outline use of medications in during this, or guidelines for use. And one of the things that the guidelines stress is that certain medications should not be considered standard of care, and that which will result in some studies that are actually undergoing IRB review currently, having to modify, treatment arms, or add, additional placebo arms. So, as we were saying when we started out here, guidelines and other types of things related to COVID-19 are changing so rapidly that protocols that get submitted on a Monday, by the time it gets to an IRB review, there's changes that would need to be implemented in order for that study to move forward. So we're being as flexible as we can from an IRB perspective, such that when guidelines like these come out, the IRB can be as nimble as possible, the reviewers, so that protocols that are approved meet the current guidelines as laid out by whatever entity or group would be issuing them. We have distributed them to IRB members. We will have them available as needed, but I think it provides a statement right now about what the current thinking is in terms of medications and how they should be utilized during this pandemic.
The next question is, when and how will the decisions of the task force be communicated to the applicants?
So the decisions of the study section will be communicated in writing to the principal investigator. They will be coming by email, because it is a group that is it's not a IRB action, it's an action that's taken by a study section. So there will be communication sent to the principal investigator by email from Dr. Davis's, from the chairman of medicine's office.
The next question is from someone who says they receive the requests for research study participants' payments. They rely on the departments to determine if the payments comply with the UMB severe restrictions. And so long as they have the regular required documentation, they are processing the payments. Should they be looking for additional information from the departments uh, with approvals or just general documentation specific to COVID-19 before they process the payments?
So in terms of additional documentation, it would be whatever that the department currently requires to be submitted by the study coordinator and study team in order to, process the payments. The finance department at Maryland was going to be issuing guidance that would allow for the use of electronic gift cards, which would help facilitate getting payment to participants. That should be being distributed. I am not aware of any other changes in processes or payment to participants that have been implemented either at the department level or at the institutional level. We have not gotten any feedback from the research community about anything related to payment to participants. And if there is any feedback and there's any concerns, please let us know because we will work to address those as soon as possible.
We have a question that asks, they appreciate that the changes to approved studies can be moved to virtual platforms without IRB modification. However, what do they do with the consent forms that were previously getting signed in person?
I think that's sort of a multi-level question, and a lot of it depends on what the situation is. On the extreme end, what do we do with consent forms for patients we want to enroll in a COVID-19 protocol? And it's gotten to the point where we've made accommodations to the point you can send in the consent form into the room with the patient. The patient can read it. It can be photographed on a cell phone and sent out, and then the paper destroyed. So there's no risk of infection passing out from that. I think that at this time we have to make pretty much any type of accommodation we can make for the research of the ability to sign consent. I think the one concept we have to keep in mind though is that we have to somehow or another, if we're doing electronic consent, we have to assure that the person that we're speaking with, that the person that we're sending the electronic communication to is the person we think that we're doing that. And in no way do we compromise the confidentiality or the privacy of the research subject. So we don't want to send a letter to somebody and just have somebody else open and find out that their loved one has a disease process they didn't know about. And so despite the fact that we're making changes, we still have to really respect the rights and welfare of the research subject. Julie, I'm sure you have more to add on that.
100% agree with you there. We've posted the guidance on electronic consent. I can't remember the date that it was posted, but it is on under the FAQs on the coronavirus website. Any consent process that can be done remotely is 100% encouraged. One of the most important things is if you're not going to have the hard copy of the consent document and you're just going to have the signature page, whether it's signed by the participant or the LAR, I encourage very strong, thorough, and complete documentation of the informed consent process, which includes the discussion with the family members or with the participants. If anyone needs the template for discussion of the informed consent process and how to document it, that is also found on our website. That part is going to be extremely, extremely important moving forward in order to document that participants exist and were actually enrolled in the study. And I would also encourage, if there's more than one person involved in the informed consent process, that more than one person sign that progress note, whether it's another team member, it could even be, an attending who was present, the PI, whomever. I think the documentation, the stronger it is, It just improves the veracity and the content of it.
The next question is, at this time, we can make modifications in Cicero to remotely assess the this is specific to stroke survivors' functions through Zoom-like methods. So, what is the process and approval for using virtual technology for these assessments?
So currently, right now, modifications to use those types of technologies can be submitted with regular, modifications to previously approved research, and they are 100% allowed. What I would also have you refer to also is the guidance about the telehealth capabilities that have been approved for use. And what do I mean by that? Certain telehealth platforms recently have been noted to not be that secure. There's been Zoom booming or whatever they want to call it, where platforms are being hijacked by outside entities. So you have to be extremely cognizant of what platforms are approved for use. Look at the telehealth, what is listed on our website. Things like Facebook Live should not be utilized for patient interactions. But things like WebEx and other ones that are listed there are approved for use. And, some patients may not have access to a computer. So you're going back to the old usage of your phone or usage of a cell phone. So that's also appropriate.
So we're coming up with about 10 minutes left. I wanted to give each of our panelists a chance. Is there anything you'd like to review or to reiterate for our community? Dr. Buskirk, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks. Well, first I want to thank everybody for your questions. They're relevant and pertinent. And again, we appreciate the challenges you're facing trying to conduct your research and continue the research in this environment as we're under these severe restrictions. As Julie, Dr. Daugherty, and Dr. Rosenthal both mentioned, there have been accommodations made to consent process, the IRB processes, modifications, et cetera. The Human Research Protections Program is being as agile and adaptive as we can possibly be. And as Dr. Daugherty mentioned, the IRB has not missed a step this entire time. We are adept and accustomed to working virtually, and thankfully that enabled all of the staff of the HRPO, the IRB members, as well as the leadership to be able to function without missing a beat. With that said, as has been described, COVID-19 research is the priority right now. While operations have gone on as before with other types of research, we'd ask that during this time that you continue to understand the complexity and the environment in which we're working. And if you have questions or concerns that have not been addressed today, please reach out to any one of the panelists to ask your specific question. Much of this, as you're aware, I mean, this is a once in a 100-year time period that we've experienced a pandemic with the severity and scope that we're experiencing. And so while we are being proactive, trying to think several steps ahead and be agile in adapting to what we need to, there are elements of this that are unknown. And we have to make decisions based on information available at the time the decision is made. And so I appreciate every one of you logging in and joining us today. And keep in mind, we will communicate as much information as we can when we know it, and when we have it available, it will be sent out to all of you. And once again, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Buskirk. Dr. Rosenthal, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I just like to, you know, as we're sitting at home and trying to manage our lives well, through social distancing and not going out, not going to restaurants, not going to work, it seems like this is a process that's never going to end. But the truth is that we're going to come out on the other end of this sometime. The world's going to look different. It may not be the same, but it's going to get better at some point or another. What does that mean from a research standpoint? What it means to me is that although we're making restrictions on what new protocols can go ahead, what we're not making restrictions on is the creative mind of the researcher and the ability to generate new information, not only just about COVID-19, but about all the other things that are important. People are still getting cancer. People are still getting heart disease. People are still dying from trauma. And we can't let all these things go by the wayside just because COVID-19 is here. So what I would urge you is to continue to work on these protocols. We may not be able to do them now, but there's going to come a time where we're going to go from severe to less severe restrictions. And it'd be nice at that time if we had a whole bunch of new protocols that could be implemented or started at that point rather than waiting 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, and starting from scratch at that point. So I'd urge the research community to continue to work on the protocols that they have established, even if they're not working now, continue on new ideas which may be generated, whether they have to do with infectious disease or not, and that we will work with you from a point of view of the IRB and the people in the HRPO to continue to get these protocols to the process of approval. So when it's appropriate, they can be started or restarted, and we'll continue to, meet our goal of doing research about the many disease processes which we face.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenthal. Dr. Doherty?
So I echo the sentiments and ideas and of Dr. Buskirk and Dr. Rosenthal. I think that the Human Research Protection Program it's here and is here to be responsive to the needs of the research community. And I applaud everyone who is working and tapping into creative and innovative methods and ideas to address COVID-19. And as Dr. Rosenthal said, we're going to come out on the other end of this, and we're going to contribute to the human condition, and we're going to contribute to finding an answer to the pandemic. And I thank you all for everything you've been doing, and just want to echo that we're here. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, anything you need help with, please reach out. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sorry. So thank you everyone for your time and attention. I just want to let everyone know a recording of this Q&A session will be posted on the Human Research Protection Office website. As you can see, the contact information for our panelists is on your screen. Please reach out to them directly with any additional questions, for any questions that we weren't able to get to today, or any requests for information that you might have. Also, as you know, all the groups are meeting regularly. Please continue to watch for any updates or future informational events on the HRPO website. Doctors, thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.